Hello and welcome to week 5. So we're halfway through the course, and I want to tell you much appreciated each of your journeys. I wanted to review where we were from last week and what we're going to be doing over the next 3 weeks. If you want to give yourself a pat on the back, you have made it to this level information. Once you've given your uh, content some markup, that at least makes it hopefully readable or understandable by a machine, and we'll try to get to whether a human could make any sense of it or not. So some of the topics that we're going to cover, I will say that every week really should begin with you looking at the module. This week is introducing a concept about taxonomies, or as I'm calling it, nouns. So we're going to do nouns and verbs. So nouns are ways to describe things. There's a pretty good set of information here to get you started. And as usual in the class, we then will take it to Mural, where we can work on trying to um, give it some structure around some different activities. In looking at this week, I really do appreciate that I think every one of you gave a good rationale of why we were using HTML. One of the main reasons that you might have seen, and we'll definitely encounter more as we move forward, is repetition. There's a lot of repetitiveness on the web. In fact, you end up doing things over and over again, which is a terrific thing because computers happen to be very good at doing repetitive tasks. Humans are not that good at that. So if you look, for example, I don't know if you've ever tried this, but some of you had said how you had looked at the source of some websites. So when you look at our website, I think you can kind of tell that we're still not quite practicing what we preach. I mean, a human like myself, I'm going to use some other methods that we'll talk about later in the class, but just visually, it's a little bit hard to figure out what's going on. Some people use colors, some do not. If you actually looked at the source, which you can do if you have a web inspector, I was just interested to see how does Mural, what HTML do they use for such strange content? And this is a tag we did not particularly get into too much. It's the div tag. But the div tag is somewhat meaningless. It just means box, to be quite honest. So you can count yourself amongst one of the very few that at least understands that there are other tags that you can use, and you're not really having to use as many language areas. Like here, if you just read this mural container, mural top bar, widget container, well, that's pretty good. That means you can name it whatever you want. The downside of naming it whatever you want is it's hard to speak the same language amongst people. That's why we're starting with HTML5 only, because at least at this point, it's a language that everybody should be able to understand. There's only a very few terms, and you can use it to mean exactly what it means. You know, you can. As I went through all of your assignments, I just read it like you would read anything, and if it made some sense to me, I usually said good job. If it didn't make much sense, I would say, oh, I think you could do better. So that was the goal of the prior exercise. I will tell you some sites. This is a pretty good one. If you did look at Apple, you'll see some familiar things. So if you look right away, you'll see that there's a nav here. There are some divs, but yes, if you look in here, here's main is another tag, section, which we all know and love, with a list inside of it. These are all things that I think at least let me know that the information architecture is really all the way at the bottom level. So they're thinking about how do we use this pattern, maybe it's something like a big picture with some things underneath, how do we use it and reuse it and reuse it again so that users and other people will see that that's the way we're structuring our content. So I know you guys said that and did a really a good job of explaining why I'm starting at such a low level, and even with something that people consider maybe a little bit hard to understand, these divs, and oh, look at there, we've got a figure as well. So they, I think, have really thought through how to use this code to make things that are very repetitious reusable. So that brings us to this week. So this week, as I said, we're talking about taxonomies and nouns that are used to describe. So the activities and the assignment is really to introduce that we've been at this kind of low level where we thought about how to group things, and we're really looking at this data, which I assume even at this point you might not quite be so happy with. Maybe wondering, why did I pick this data in the first place? Because either there's not enough of it or it's not very easy to organize. I can feel some sympathy, but that is often the case with information architecture. You're not always in control of everything, but if you need to add more fields or something like that, that's fine. But now we want to take a higher look. So a taxonomy is really, again, about that universal language. How can we describe things in a way that people can either already understand and can bring their own knowledge into what we're describing? So this is, again, higher level organization. So if you try to create a navigation structure, for example, for your data, you'll need to know what buckets they fit into. And I'd suggest right now we would think about 3-4 buckets. Not very many, but what they are is really important. Many of you have asked, I want to be able to do popular and top 10 and things like that. Well, you can't yet, because remember, those while they're really good concepts, they rely upon another level of data, which is somehow to know, how does something become popular? It isn't just that you say it is, it has to have mechanisms behind it that we'll go into a little bit later. So now I want to really describe this data at a higher level. And I've given you some interesting examples here. I think a few are fun to watch. There's my favorite scene from Diner, and there's some ideas here about how to describe things like taste in a wine. But that's what this week is about. So this week, next week, and the very next week are going to build upon each other to create the deliverables for assignment or project 3. So this week is really about understanding how do you group your data, and that's really going to go pretty much straight into how do people navigate or get around that data. So as usual, read the module, try to get a feel for your data. Is it still in something that you can use, or your content, is it still usable? Do you need to really work on it some more? Structurally, I think you're going to reuse that structure shortly as we get into finally drawing some things, maybe putting some things on paper or visualizing. But this week it's really just about this job of nouns and understanding how things are grouped in the real world. So look forward to your contributions.